This is Travis Wayne Goodsell. It's halftime on the Sundays. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' October 2018 General Conference. And my neighbor cooked my lunch for me, hamburgers, so they weren't burned, if you remember the video from yesterday. And it's getting dark on this side, so you can't really see my face unless I do whatever. Alright, so I'm all set to go, but we've still got another hour before the final session of conference. So I thought I'd do a video on a popular thing that Mormons used to do. Oh, I've got a sneeze coming on. It's gonna... Okay, so this is going to interrupt the video and cause a distraction until it finally blows. Okay. Mormons used to do this a lot when it first came out, because, you know, Mormons like to think that they're reasonable people, and when somebody comes along and says something that appears to be reasonable, they just go hog wild and spread the word. So this is about the Book of Mormon. It used to be somebody in the church, I don't know if it was from General Conference or just a Mormon myth passed around, made popular, but somebody started off saying, if the Book of Mormon is true, then Joseph Smith was a prophet, the church is true. Anybody know fallacy? Yeah, it's a fallacy. Just because the Book of Mormon is true does not mean that Joseph Smith is a prophet, nor does it mean that the church is true. But Mormons have added to it and expanded upon it and run with it. And so now the church is true, therefore the Book of Mormon is true, and Joseph Smith was a prophet. Or Joseph Smith was a prophet, therefore the Book of Mormon is true, and the church is true. See? When you have a fallacy, people go wild. We need to educate people on fallacies, so we can cut out all this crap about spiritual truth, which is also a fallacy. Alright, so, Book of Mormon. If you've read any of my work since December of 2017, you will know that I have learned through scientific truth, not spiritual truth, that the Book of Mormon is not true. It is not a translation from ancient Egyptian plates. I studied Egyptian. I know. I've discovered that Egyptian glyphs have not been translated by Egyptologists. Scientifically, not a spiritual thingy that often Mormons do. There's some Mormons I've met over the time who've come up with spiritual translations of Egyptian glyphs. So no, I did this through scientific processes. I took philosophy of science. That's my dual major at the University of Lethbridge. So I know how to develop a theory. I know how to test the theory, because if you can't test a theory, you need to disregard it, because it's unsound. And so, yeah, I'm the guy who has learned that Egyptologists don't really know how to translate as well as they thought they did. And as a result, I identify the Egyptian document glyphs that correspond to the different stories in the book of Genesis. That's right. And I discussed that in another video about the Book of Abraham. I think it's the breaking news one. Book of Abraham translation correct or something like that. But, you know, you'd think Mormons would flock to it. I specifically titled it so that Mormons would flock to it. And, no, the church says that the Book of Mormon is false, so we're not going to believe anybody who comes forward with scientific truth. Yeah, I'm hung up on Elder Oaks' talk yesterday about spiritual truth over scientific truth. Oh man, he really messed up bad. And then he went and sat down before President Nelson sat down. Oh man. Okay, well, the Book of Mormon. So it's not a translation from an Egyptian document, and many scholars and linguists have learned, yeah, it's plagiarized. They don't know all the books that are in the Book of Mormon, but they know of at least several. You know, you have your Solomon Spalding theory, and others have the View of the Hebrews theory, and then some have done actual linguistic research and have identified other books that are in there using computer programs to plug in the books, and then the book or the computer then analyzes the two documents to find out similar patterns of textual material. And YouTube has a video on it. So it's not an ancient translation, it's a plagiarized book, and as a plagiarized book, it is therefore not an ancient history of the American Indians. So it's fiction, plagiarized fiction. And so is the church not true? Is Joseph Smith not a prophet? You know, you still can't make that conclusion because that's also unsound. Joseph Smith can still be a prophet with a false Book of Mormon, a fictitious Book of Mormon. So that's still okay. And we can, Young Sheldon, Season 2, Episode 3, the Jesus Octopus. Gotta watch it. Oh man. Yeah, it goes over the concept. So, that doesn't mean that the church is true if the Book of Mormon is fictitious and Joseph is a prophet. You gotta have a sound argumentative premises that lead to a sound conclusion. And so, if the Book of Mormon were to be true and Joseph Smith were a restoring prophet, and it doesn't lead to the church being true either. Why? Because there are successors to Joseph Smith. And so a successor could ruin the whole thing. And if you've seen my videos, my blogs, books, you know that there was a successive prophet who did destroy the church, Brigham Young, which means that everyone after him is therefore not a legitimate prophet, because that is deductive. And but if Brigham Young were a true prophet and the Adam God doctrine were the correct change of who God was, and if polygamy was allowed by God, and if blacks were truly denied by God to have the priesthood, and if Brigham Young was justified in murdering Indians, neighbors back in Missouri and in Illinois and Ohio. And if he was justified in creating a brewery when he moved to Utah, and he stole the print or the coin press to make coins, Deseret coins, he stole that press, and other things that Brigham Young is guilty of doing, criminal violations, sins, etc. If he was still accepted by God after all that, that does not mean that John Taylor was then a good person to make the church true. And so you see that even though the church may have been true at one point, it doesn't mean that the church is still true by virtue of succession in the church. Each and every single prophet is held under a strict requirement to maintain truth. And if they blow it, as Brigham Young did, that's it. That's over for the church. And so when Jesus and the apostles were killed, guess what? That's it. It's over. You know, you can have people claim to start up a new church, like Islam did, the Muslims, with Muhammad, but you can't have Christians clinging to a new authority figure as they did with their bishops of the congregations. And then to have Constantine come in, gather the bishops together, okay, figure out one doctrine, and I'm going to create the God for you to worship, and oh, by the way, I'm now your leader. It doesn't work that way with God. Come on. It doesn't work that way with logic. So, yeah, Nelson, if everybody before him was legitimate, he would have to prove himself as the new president. And so far, he's not doing a good job at all. Taking away the high priesthood from the men, and now taking away churches, no more churches being built. And, you know, if he wants to cut back on Sunday worship, great, because the church has been testing that for a long time now, with wards as to whether or not they needed to have Sunday school anymore. But yeah, and even singles wards. There are huge debates over, do we have singles wards or do we get rid of singles wards? Are they just a waste for members because they're supposed to be breeding? Mormon youth are supposed to breed, and they're just going to the singles wards and hanging out. Got to put a stop to this. But, you know, whatever. You know, they reach 26 years old and they're a menace to society. Brigham Young said that, and that's why Steve Young got teased when he turned 26 and was still single. Yeah, his mother makes a great meal out in Connecticut. Good people. The Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon can still present a good message. The introduction quotes Wilford Woodruff's journal, which the church have twisted around to say it was an actual quote of Joseph Smith's, and every member misquotes it and says, the Book of Mormon is the most correct on the earth. Wouldn't a dictionary be the most correct book on the earth? Let us reason together. So that's not what Joseph Smith said. That's not what Wilford Woodruff wrote in his journal. Because guess what? The sentence keeps going. A man will draw nearer to God by abiding by its precepts. That's the message that is given in the introduction. It has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon is the most correct book on the earth. Because all you have to do is do a linguistic study, find out it's plagiarized, find out it's not a translation from Egyptian documents, find out it's not a history of the American people, and guess what? It's no longer correct. So you got to read the full sentence. And Mormons make that mistake time and time and time and time again. President Benson, Mormons believe can't watch rated R movies. And most of the people have forgotten that it was Benson who brought it up in April conference, 1988. Yeah, 8, not 6. 8, I think. 6, 8. Well, anyway, because if you go back and read his talk or listen to it, they haven't edited it, so there's no period there, because that would really look awkward to start a sentence with that. But that's what he says. Don't watch R-rated movies, that. So go back to grade school, remember the English grammar classes, and the sentence graphing charting system, and what does that do to the meaning of the sentence? It enhances it or expands upon it. And so President Benson did not say we can't watch any rated R movie ever again. Didn't say it. I made that comment in the Deseret News back in the day, where our actual names were used for our comments for articles, and I had written a comment, and then a woman wrote back, "No, Brigham Young or President Benson said don't watch R-rated movies, period." She completely disregarded what he said, didn't bother to go back and check. She just went with what she interpreted from what he said. And if you go back in the conference, the crowd actually gasps when he says no R-rated movies. They gasp. He keeps on talking that are bad. That's what his message was about. Because if you read further on down, he talks about participate in entertainment that is good. And he lists a whole bunch of things, but that was what he was trying to get across to the members of the church. Don't follow bad examples, follow good examples. Movies have a protagonist and an antagonist. And so if we're watching movies where the antagonist triumphs, and it's not specifically designed that way by the author, those are bad movies. When the protagonist does the wrong thing, does not save the day, is a poor example to follow, that's a bad movie. It has nothing to do with hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. That's a Catholic thing. And yet that's how they rate movies these days, is by hearing no evil, saying no evil, speaking no evil. And people get offended. Oh, they're starting to show a little more flesh. They're starting to say a little more biblically harsh words. And, Gone with the Wind. The first time ever in a movie where a biblical swear is used. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. So, yeah. I haven't seen the movie in full, or at least I don't remember it anymore. But I remember that because everybody quotes it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's a Bible swear. Simpsons make great fun of that. But, what time have we got? 45 minutes left. Okay. And yeah, but you can't find my comment anymore, because the Deseret News, after 2008, pulled all of my comments out of their newspaper online. You can't find it in the archives. And I know this because you can find her reply, and you can find another guy who replied to another comment that I made. But mine, they're gone. And yeah, the Deseret News did what the Egyptian pharaohs did to their previous pharaoh and erased them from history. And that's a long story also, but that's another story. We're talking about the Book of Mormon being true. Yeah, the Book of Mormon's not true. But does it have good precepts? Will those precepts, if they are followed to a T, will they draw us closer to God? And some people read it and they learn about the Lamanites. You know, Laman, he gives his position and in detail as to why he believes he was unjustly treated by his younger brother Nephi, who's the protagonist in the story. And then there's discussion of the wickedness of the great and abominable church in great detail. There's detailed discussion of King Noah and his wickedness, and their discussed reasoning as to why Abinadi was a terrorist and mentally ill person. And there's antichrists in there who go into detail as to their logical thinking, as they suppose, to justify unsound arguments. And there's the Gadianton robbers, there's Coriantumr and Shiz. And if you don't know Coriantumr and Shiz, you gotta read the Book of Mormon, because the church will not make a Book of Mormon movie because it would have to be rated X for that one scene alone. Awesome. And remember, it's fiction, but the church will say it's spiritually true that such an event would happen. Great stuff. And then, yeah, the final battle where the Nephites are destroyed, it gets into graphic, gory, horrible behavior. That's just outright, cringing. And, you know, the wars, detail on wars. And many Mormons who actually read the Book of Mormon are disturbed by many of these passages. They don't get it. And that requires getting good grades in your English comprehension class in grade school. So, you know, even though Shakespeare talks about horrible, awful things also in his works, do you understand what he's trying to tell people as the thesis? What is the moral of the story? And Mormons don't get the moral of the story, and they forget about all the other stuff in the Book of Mormon that they don't like, and they focus on what they do like. And so, yes, Mormons will point to the best part in the Book of Mormon is when Jesus appears to the American Indians and physically shows himself to them and quotes verbatim the Sermon on the Mount that he gave over in the Old World. Did you listen to the way I worded that? Yeah, the Book of Mormon is not true. It's plagiarized. It's fiction. But Mormons don't catch on. So John Welsh, he thinks he's discovered a great thing in the Book of Mormon that proves it's true. Chiasmus, the Hebrew poetry. No. Remember, the book is a translation of Egyptian, not Hebrew, Egyptian. So there should be no Hebrew in it. No Hebrew poetry, no chiasmus. What John Welsh did was discover plagiarism by Joseph. It was actually Signy Rigdon, but never mind. And then there's Joe Samson. He's actually got some good stuff about Jewish mysticism, and is quite knowledgeable in that. But again, his book, written by the finger of God, he shows how the Book of Mormon is true because of all the Jewish mysticism that he finds in it. Again, it's supposed to be an Egyptian record, not a Hebrew record. And thus, Joe Samson, like John Welsh, have discovered that the Book of Mormon is plagiarized. Joseph Smith knew Jewish mysticism and put it in there. Now, he didn't believe in Jewish mysticism because in a couple of places, one time by Nephi and another time by Jacob, a Freemason name, by the way, and yeah, they utilize biblical names, but Freemason, which involves the Jewish mysticism, they both talk about the prophecies of the Jews. And what they're referring to in those two passages are Jewish mysticism techniques. And Joseph Smith only adopts the Tree of Life, and he doesn't get into Gematria, and it's an English translation, so you can't really utilize Keraton or Tamaria in the Book of Mormon, because it's not in Hebrew. So as much as Joe Samson does great work in helping people understand Jewish mysticism and learning how to create a fun game in Hebrew, Joseph Smith clearly indicates that those practices are beyond the mark, as the characters in the Book of Mormon say. So how do we discern truth then? If there is no true church on the earth, what do? Or do we just give up and say, there is no true church, I'll just live my life as a good person and allow everybody else to do whatever they want? No. Again, you can't allow people to abuse you or others, to commit crimes, to be corrupt. Like I've mentioned in another video, we're in a ransom economy. Everybody is ransoming other people, holding products hostage, not just kidnapping and holding people for ransom. They're holding our products for ransom. When we buy a product, if we don't buy a warranty, it gives out before the warranty, which is a rare occasion because they usually die the day after the warranty expires. But they try to get us to get the insurance warranty so that they can get more money. And then, like I said, the thing dies and we have to buy another one because the parts for it are too much, especially when we have to pay a mechanic to fix it for us. And that's ransom economy. And so that's what when you don't have a true church, where do you go? And Joseph Smith does do a clever thing in his Joseph Smith history that got canonized. And he actually shows us the way to make it work. Even though we understand that it was all a fictional account, he didn't actually have a first vision experience. Others were having it during his time frame, but it was not until Thomas B. Marsh's son told of his first vision experience that Joseph Smith then wrote that he had one as well. And so the first vision is fiction, but the precepts taught in it are true. And it follows the same pattern in Alma 32, starting in verse 28, that I've been trying to impress upon Mormons over and over again, but they keep listening to these prophets, Elder Oaks, who talk about spiritual truth. Ugh. But yeah, that's how you learn truth. If you somebody tells you something, if you read something, if the Spirit tells you in your mind something, uh, if you're inspired, all of those are the Word. The Word isn't exclusive to Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone, or the Bible, as many Christians believe. The Word is the Bible and there is no other word. No, any word can be utilized and identified as true or false through this process, just like a seed as to whether it becomes a fruit, as it's supposed to. If you plant an apple seed and it results as an orange, well, you know that the seed was false. But as an orange, it is true. So you just make that correction there, that the seed is actually an orange seed. If you plant the seed thinking it's going to produce apples, and instead it produces weeds, then you know that the seed is false. And so it's that simple, and that's scientific truth. You don't have to have spiritual truth to justify it. And yeah, your inspiration is technically spiritual. It's not something tangible that we can identify until you write it out, until you put it on paper or carve it on rock or type it on a computer. And even then, that's just the blueprint. That's just the initial idea. You then have to make it. The movie Contact with Jodie Foster, they receive a message from outer space, and the message they eventually discover is a blueprint to make a machine. And they have a big debate. Do we build it or do we not build it? Is it a trap? If we build it, will it be a transport that will bring in an army of aliens and destroy Earth? Or, what do we do? Is it a weapon? And they had this big debate, and you can debate your opinion all you want, but you'll never know the truth unless you actually build it and find out what it is through the scientific truth. Not spiritual speculation, claiming it is truth. And so, of course, they built it, and they built two, because that's what the government does. And the Independence Day, you don't think a hammer actually costs $1,000, do you? And so, yeah, they scientifically test it. And the thing is that they tried to use spiritual truth in there, because she fell straight down according to everybody looking at the scene. But in her mind, she was there for who knows how long. And she asked, how long was I there? And they're going, what? You fell straight down. And, they're trying to tell her that what she experienced wasn't real. And she tried to say, no, I actually saw it. I just have to have faith. And so as a scientist, she realizes spiritual truth is true. But then the government people have a discussion at the end among themselves about how there were 18 minutes of blank tape used up on the recorder. That's the scientific proof that she did leave for those 18 minutes, even though it appeared to outsiders that she just fell straight down. And they don't let her know about that. So she's left believing that spiritual truth can now be harmonized with scientific truth. And then the government people are disregarding the scientific truth to claim that she was a mentally ill person trying to lie and deceive the government. So yeah, it was a great movie, but the author of the story kind of messed it up there at the end. But I really like that movie. So yeah, that's how you know truth, is by reproducing it. Somebody tells you something, you know, Trump gets up and says all Mexicans are rapists. Well, okay. All we have to do to prove Trump is a liar is to find one Mexican who is not a rapist. And guess what? Trump is automatically a liar, which is why you cannot use absolute words. All. Never. You can't use those words, because all it takes is for one example that contradicts you, and boom, you're a liar. Your whole argument is unsound, and you got to come up with a different argument. And people aren't getting that with Trump, and so yeah, and people aren't getting it with the church. You know, in any church, you know, when they use unsound logic, they're overstepping their bounds, and they're setting themselves up for failure. And okay, so yeah, how do you know if a church is true? Because what that means is that it is led by God. And so obviously Jesus Christ is not going to appear on the pulpit of General Conference for the LDS Church. Just not happening. So how then do we determine if it's true or if it's false? Because if Jesus Christ doesn't appear, some people think, oh, then it's obviously not true. But that's not sound either, because of inspiration. First, you have to have a sound argument for who God is and how he communicates with man, and then you can work on the sound argument for the church being led by that particular God. So you have to have sound arguments all the way through to establish it, and then the church being true involves several stages combined together. And the Book of Mormon, whether it's true or false, has no ramification on the church as whether it's true or false. You know, it doesn't matter. Joseph Smith as a prophet, however, does have to be in part of that equation if the church is true. But not just him. You have to throw in the sound argument for God, and then you have to throw in the sound argument for each successive prophet from Joseph Smith. And unfortunately, after he died, there were over 80 groups that splintered off and formed their own churches. So then Mormons have to realize this when they say that their particular splinter group is the true one over the other splinter groups, because now you have to factor in all those other sound arguments, if you can make them sound, to justify your position as being sound. And Mormons don't understand that. Because technically, Mormons, Joseph Smith gave the priesthood to the women of the church through Emma as the Relief Society president, the women's president for the church. So when Brigham Young went west, Emma stayed behind. Emma still had women's priesthood authority to lead the women of the church. However, she didn't do anything with it, and when she died, it died with her, because she assumed that her son would be the one to take over the church. And he did when he grew up and was old enough, and the uncle or whoever it was that filled in it temporarily stepped down and gave it to the direct lineage. And then, of course, that church no longer has a direct lineage, and they had to come up with alternative ways, and they're no longer called the Reorganized Church. The Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Gotta use the full name, no nicknames. So, yeah, that's what's going on. So, you can establish truth in your life. You can identify when people are lying. When Brett Kavanaugh was speaking at his confirmation hearing, in his opening statement alone, I was telling people, you know, learn fallacy. Learn how to identify unsound arguments. Because Kavanaugh, you know, if you had a checklist or a bingo square thing, you know, you could have won bingo several times over or completed the whole checklist. He just rambled off fallacy after fallacy after fallacy. It's just, oh man. I love beer. I drink a lot of beer. Men like beer. Women like beer. I like beer. I drink a lot of beer. I sleep after beer, but I don't pass out. Oh man, we are so doomed. Okay, so we've got 20 minutes until conference, and I've got 40 minutes of video to convert into a movie to upload to YouTube. So I think I'll end it now. So I hope you understand you can know the truth, scientific truth, not spiritual truth, to deny real truth. You know, that's the theme in this conference, it appears, is spiritual truth will safely guide you through. Mormons should know that song that I'm taking it from. The iron rod is the word of God. You know, it won't guide you through if you just hold it in your hand. You've actually got to read it, identify what it's asking you to do, and reproduce it. And then you will draw nearer to God. If you don't reproduce it, you just hold it in your hand and you get up and pulpit and Sunday, first Sunday of the month, and say, I know the Book of Mormon is true. You don't know it's true because it's not true. But are the precepts true? You can't tell people that the precepts are true if you don't tell them what you reproduced. That's what a testimony is. You know, a testimony is not saying the Holy Ghost told me something was true and therefore I now have spiritual truth and I have a testimony that it is true. That's not a testimony. When you go on a court and you declare, I saw the defendant murder that woman, that's a testimony. You physically saw something. You physically heard something. You physically experienced something. You physically built a boat to save your family from a flood. You physically built a boat to take your family to the promised land. That is testimony. When you get to the promised land, you now know that the inspiration you had to build the boat was true. Scientifically true. Not spiritually true. But because it was inspiration, that is the concept of spiritual. Because spiritual ideas, they have no tangible form yet. You've got to make them tangible in order for them to be legitimate. If you just sit on it, don't do anything with it, faith without works is dead. So you can convert yourself into a dead seed, but you're worthless. You've got to convert your seed into fruit. Without doing that, You'll never know the truth. And you'll continually argue with me and continually go to church and pay tithing to them, never knowing what the truth is. And when the floods come, and they're coming real quick, you'll be wondering, what happened? Why me? So, here we go with the final round. We'll see what doozies he throws at us this time.